guys, so there has been a latest development that US has stopped a Russian oil tanker, and that is a big development because we all know that India also buys Russian oil, and in large quantity, because of which recently Trump said that they will put 500% tariffs on all the countries that are buying oil from Russia.
Yeah.
So that is a big problem for India because like Indians are not buying the oil for the local people, they are buying it for the huge companies. So we also don't want them to buy it from Russia because it will be a problem for us if there is a problem between India and USA. So but now USA is going one step more forward. Now they are stopping the Russian oil tankers from going anywhere. So Russian oil goes to Venezuela and all the other countries. So what is US planning to do? Let's watch this.
Well, that escalated quickly because off the coast of Iceland, US forces just launched a campaign targeting Russia, Venezuela, and Iran's shadow fleet of sanctioned oil tankers because it just led to a standoff between a Russian nuclear attack submarine and a US Navy SEAL team in the Northern Atlantic.
Oh,
and
it was Navy SEAL versus a submarine.
Other Western nations like the UK, France, Germany, and Estonia have all started a global crackdown against these illicit tankers by intercepting and boarding them. The shadow fleet is a gigantic clandestine operation that Russia has invested billions of dollars into in order to continue to ship their oil to customers while evading Western sanctions. To put it into perspective, Russia's shadow fleet now accounts for nearly 20% of global oil tanker capacity. So, why do all these countries view these old shadow
So what is shadow fleets?
No, I don't know.
So the thing is, like, Russian oil cannot go like in a natural way. Like they cannot take oil in oil tankers and tell that this is Russian oil and they can export because US has put sanctions on them.
Oh, so they just play hide and seek or
Yeah,
something?
so what they do is they put their oil in some other ship and they tell this is other ship.
This isn't oil.
So this is a shadow fleet. So then that fleet goes and then so that US is trying to stop that because that is also increasing a lot.
Okay, so they caught that ship.
Yeah, and they are stopping those ships from going to other countries.
Tankers as worthy of risking direct confrontation. 2 weeks ago, the Bella 1 sanctioned oil tanker made a break for it. They tried to run the U.S. Navy blockade of Venezuela. The U.S. Coast Guard Legend Cutter class gave chase and followed close behind, demanding that they stop over radio communications. But the sanctioned ship refused, like a highway police chase on open waters. The Russian government told U.S. officials to stop following the boat, but they didn't listen either. The chase was on, and while the Bella 1 was fleeing from U.S. forces, they made their way from the Caribbean into the Atlantic Ocean. The crew on board quickly changed its name while fleeing. They changed it to the Mariana, and they basically swapped out their license plates while on the run. Then they painted a crudely drawn Russian flag on the side of the ship. Fair enough, I'm no artist either, but the rogue ship now claimed official protection under Moscow. This was seen as shocking because the whole point of the shadow fleet before was to provide Russia with a level of plausible deniability. Shell companies purposefully hid that they were connected to Russia behind confusing paperwork that would make my average infantryman brain explode. We're seeing a reversal of this now because the reason that they reflagged themselves as Russian is because they believe that the U.S. forces would back down in the face of that. And that the U.S. forces would want to avoid a major geopolitical incident of capturing an official Russian oil tanker, which is something that has never happened before as far as I'm aware. This move complicated U.S. efforts to seize the ship, because according to retired Rear Admiral Kenny, quote, once it legitimately registered, it gets the protection of the flag under international law. End quote.
Actually, I think that is a very smart way to do it. Because like Russia could be like, you put sanctions on me, that's okay. But you cannot stop me. You are not the boss. If I want to go to some country, I will go. You can hurt that country, you can hurt my country, but you cannot stop
I'm honestly not getting the point of the USA that why USA is stopping
because
even
Russia
the other
is fighting with Ukraine.
Okay.
So US wants them to stop.
Okay.
That's why.
That puts American troops in direct defiance of the Russian government and military. Then Russia sent their nuclear Akula-class attack submarine and additional surface warships to escort the fleeing Bella 1 tanker to safety. Its deadly torpedoes were sent as a message, as an attempt to scare off U.S. forces and prevent the ship from being seized. The cutter would struggle to do anything against Russian submarine and warships, though.
What did U.S. do?
They needed U.S. military reinforcements. But how would they get there in time in the middle of nowhere out in the Atlantic? So U.S. war planners came up with the idea of sending a P-8 Poseidon submarine Hunter aircraft into the skies
Submarine
above by
Hunter.
launching it from nearby friendly air bases in the
special jets
UK.
for the submarines.
This drops dozens
Oh,
of
wow.
sonar buoys into the ocean to map the location of Russian submarines.
Wow.
It can then fire a Mark 54 lightweight torpedo from the sky that then splashes down under the ocean water and homes in on the submarine using active and passive sonar. As further guarantees of safety, the US deployed Overkill with their AC-130J gunship. It has autocannons, giant howitzers,
Oh my
and
God.
missiles. It's a serious, great power standoff at this point, unlike anything I remember in my
Yeah.
lifetime. All of these billions of dollars in military equipment are all converging on the location in the Atlantic, all over some empty,
Yeah.
rusting, aging oil tanker.
These two
Part of
countries
the-
just love a cold war. Like, just always, they always stand like this.
Yeah.
You punch me.
They love to fight.
You punch me.
Yeah,
I punch
they're
you. You punch
waiting
me. You
for the
punch me.
first move.
Yeah.
For the
Always.
reason this is worth it from the United States perspective, though, is because the entire credibility of their blockade is on the line here. Then, the U.S. sent a cargo plane loaded with the Army's 160th Sword Night Stalkers
Oh my
and a
God.
team of Navy SEALs to the UK.
So
The little bird
helicopter,
helicopters
planes,
were loaded onto the
submarines,
deck of
everything is
ships
there.
and sailed out to intercept this Russian-flagged illicit oil tanker. Wait a second, haven't I already done this mission somewhere before? Britain helped the US by providing their own air surveillance and naval support vessels.
Oh,
The
UK
SEAL
was
team
also
landed
supporting
on
him.
the artist formerly known as Bella 1. It got on the Russian ship's deck and quickly commandeered it, arresting multiple Russian crew members. These Russian crew are now reportedly going to face charges in America. It's almost unheard of for the US military to take direct action against a ship that's under Moscow's registry.
Oh my
But
God.
what's more telling, I think, is that the Russian Navy didn't retaliate and instead stood down.
Why?
But that's where things get weird. Because the reason everyone is suspicious
is
of the
real
Bella 1 ship
footage.
is because it's empty.
Empty
There were
ship.
oil on board, which
That's
has
why they
people
were like-
speculating, what's in the
Go.
hull? Is it Russian black market weapons that were meant to be smuggled to Maduro? Is it a Metal Gear? Is it nothing? What's in the box? Michelle Wise Brockman, a maritime intelligence analyst and expert on the Shadow Fleet, said, quote, "There is a blurring of commercial and military shipping around the Dark Fleet. What we're seeing now is something that has really only emerged in the last 6 or 7 months. 6, 7. The UK government said that their involvement had nothing to do with Venezuela and was mainly just part of a wider crackdown on Russia's Shadow Fleet. A British official said, quote, "We are stepping up our response against shadow vessels, and we will continue to do so." I thought it was really interesting that we heard a spokesperson from the UK Ministry of Defense say that the Defense Secretary had called it a priority to disrupt and degrade the Russian Shadow Fleet. Pat McFadden, a cabinet minister in the UK, said, quote, "The international community must recognize it's operating in a changed world in which hard power is increasingly being used to achieve national aims. I swear this never happens to my power." But why was it worth the near direct confrontation? The strange thing about the Bella 1 tanker is that it was originally sanctioned back in 2024 because it had ties to the Hezbollah and Iranian
Oh my
Quds
God.
Force. This wasn't directly
is
tied to
because of
Russian
the
oil per
Iran.
se.
Send
But
weapons.
to understand why Moscow risked their military credibility over one rusty tanker, you have to zoom out because the so-called shadow fleet of sanctioned oil tankers
it goes
has
everywhere.
become really a strategic level asset for Russia, Iran, and Venezuela.
So they're
India
supplying
also.
the
Called
weapons.
Ghost or Dark Fleet, but what it
They're supplying
refers
the
to
weapons.
Yeah.
is about
Or
500
oil.
tankers and 500 support ships that go along with it that make up this armada of 1,000 vessels that operate under false flags in an attempt to bypass Western sanctions. Russia's invested in it since 2022 because it maintains their key oil exports since their invasion of Ukraine. And it directly funds their war against Ukraine and their capabilities to sustain operations. And to give you an idea of just how important it is, it makes up 60% of Russia's sea-time oil exports, and it brings in roughly $100 billion a year, which to put into
that's why
context
they are still
is
rich.
more than all European countries have given to Ukraine's
money,
war
money.
effort since the beginning of the war. This has provided a lifeline to Venezuela, Iran, and Russia. But what route are they normally taking? Most Shadow Fleet cargoes start from Russian oil export hubs like Primorsk, with crude bound west and south. They leave the Black Sea or the Mediterranean outlets as they head through the Bosphorus routes to reach southern and global markets. Or they leave Russia's eastern ports near the Pacific and the
China.
Vladivostok region for deliveries toward Asia. They transit via the Suez Canal, they do ship-to-ship transfers offshore in the Red Sea to basically launder the oil with legit oil to mask its origin. Increasingly,
Wow.
they're using the Arctic route to transfer oil to China. And that's why in 2025 we saw the first high-profile seizures of these tankers around the world. French boarding teams took over a Russian oil tanker. An Estonian force detained a crew, and then the Russian military sent a fighter jet to help other sanctioned vessels bust away.
The thing is, like, the profit in this oil thing is too huge.
Crazy, yeah.
So that is why even if they lose one or two ships, or even
They
if they
don't
lose,
care.
yeah, they don't care. They're like, okay, it's okay. Otherwise, they would have fought with, if it would have happened with India, then everybody
Yeah.
would have gone too angry that why is US doing this to us, this and that. But Russia was like, okay, I don't want to make a fuss
Yeah.
about it. Just let it go.
And break free. The Russian military is increasingly sending naval and fighter jet escorts. Finland seized Russia's Eagle-S ship, which is allegedly part of this giant operation to cut underseas cables.
Cut
Taken together,
cables?
the reason all of this matters so much is because it directly threatens Russia's ability to wage war. And so the obvious question is, what lengths is Moscow willing to go to protect this fleet? But every action has a reaction. And this is a growing trend now where we're seeing in response the militarization of Russia's shadow fleet. Swedish Navy Chief of Operations Marko
More and more
Petkovic
guns.
said, quote, Russia's naval presence has become more permanent and present in large parts of the Baltic Sea in support of this shadow fleet. So Venezuelan and Russian officials have started placing armed military personnel on the tankers and disguising
That's a scary
them.
thing.
They're now
Yeah.
discussing arming them with portable Igla air defense systems. We know the strategy of cracking down is in the air in Washington because the RAND Corporation, which is a popular think tank for DC policy, outlined a strategy to start cracking down on this shadow fleet with seizures like this. Several officials in the UK and the US have hinted that this is part of a coordinated effort to pressure Putin to come to the negotiating table. Former US ambassador to
He won't
Brussels,
come.
Gordon
Yeah.
Sondland said, quote, in this way, Trump puts additional pressure on the economies of Iran, Russia, and Venezuela until he achieves the desired results. However, at the same time, seizing the oil tankers is also seen to be showing that the U.S. has full control over Venezuela's oil. Some argue it's more about enforcing the 50 million barrels worth of oil that the U.S. says Venezuela has agreed to provide. What
Whoa.
we're seeing, I think, is like a non-lethal version of the oil tanker wars of 1984, where Iran and Iraq attacked
Oh.
each other's commercial oil
Oh my
shipping in the Persian
God.
Gulf. Over 400 ships were damaged during
The
it.
damage.
And this also shows us how miscalculation can happen and accidentally spill over, because the sea mines laid by Iran to hit Iraq's oil tankers accidentally hit a U.S. warship.
Oh my
And the U.S.
God.
retaliated by sinking half of Iran's navy in a day.
Oh, no.
It's an old naval strategy known as Guerre de Course, which I mispronounced, but it means a war of commerce. It's been executed since World War I. So launching missiles at the shadow fleet or capturing the cargo has a similar end result. Hundreds of millions of dollars worth of oil and tankers have already been seized by the US and Western nations in 2025. But here's how that's escalating today. And the way they avoided sanctions before was by hiding their origin and spoofing their location or turning
Yeah,
off
but
their
now they're
transponders.
showing their flags.
But now many of the ships are instead overtly converting their flags to Russia. They're increasingly claiming that they're directly part of
They
the Russian
are,
government.
Don't fight us.
At least 17 oil tankers have switched to Russian flagging in the last month. This increases the chance of direct confrontation. And this is their way of increasing their security. Because once the US proved that it was willing to seize ships under a Russian flag, the rest of the Shadow Fleet didn't wait around to see what was next. There was a larger effort. Right after the U.S. captured Maduro, at least 16 oil tankers that were sanctioned by the U.S. made a break for it. They all left at the same time in a
Oh, they
coordinated
knew they are
effort
gone.
to evade the American naval blockade. It appears
So
so,
many
far
ships.
some of the tankers
It's
were
so
able to
hard
get
for
away.
USA to do
The
that.
shadow fleet of
Yeah.
tankers has become the new
See, so
flashpoint in
many
U.S.-Russia
ships
relations.
covered
And the
fully.
strategic thing to consider here is that once you capture a handful, it pressures other in the shadow fleet to not even try to violate sanctions. Meanwhile, at the same time, another sanctioned oil
Eta.
tanker, the M. Sophia, had 1.8 million barrels of oil, and it was captured in the Caribbean by another American helicopter assault. But this one actually has even way more grave consequences, I think, because the M. Sophia is sanctioned by the U.S. Treasury Department as part of the official Russian Shadow Fleet crackdown. So this ship is directly being targeted by the US government because it's part of Russia's fleet, instead of really being focused on Venezuela. So what does all this mean? What are we witnessing here right now? Ryan Seberg, a director of Center for Strategic and International Studies, explained really well what we're seeing, saying, quote, What I think is clear is that we're entering a new phase of great power competitions. Some of the things that we wouldn't have previously imagined being part of the operation are now on the table as
the
options.
world is going
And
more
once you
towards
zoom out
another
from Russia,
war.
you realize
Yeah.
this isn't just a two-player game. Because the moment you start choking off sanctioned oil at sea, you're hitting other customers too, and this
Yeah,
pulls in
India,
China
China.
directly. Because according to Reuters, Venezuela accounts for about 4% of China's oil. But on top of that, Venezuela owes payments of $19 billion worth of outstanding loans that they were paying back in
no.
oil. So the loss is felt even harder for China. That's enough money to buy 20 Navy destroyers. The reason all of this has outsized impact right now is because the oil tanker flare-up is happening at the same time as the US and Russia are engaged in a new round of diplomatic talks over the war in Ukraine. The big question is if the United States and the UK will really double down on seizing Russian oil tankers enough to hurt Moscow's bottom line and their war effort, or if this is just a big show of force, a giant dick swing.
Recently my mother was saying to me that the world is closing towards a world war, and I said to her, no, that's not possible. But now, it seems like it might be, because
Yeah.
there are some countries that are getting together, like how Russia, Venezuela, Iran are getting together, how UK, US, and all these countries are getting together, and China is on the other side. They are just hanging around and seeing what will happen. And then India is there, who is also good friend of Russia too, and who is also a good friend of USA. So then we are also a neutral part. So there are these superpowers that are doing things that are not so good, you can say.
Yeah, I thought the same, because often even my mom also often tells me the world is going to end, because as you can see, this is happening, that is happening, the wars and everything. Because in the past like 10 years we have not seen the things that we have seen like 2 to 3 years. So I think so, yeah, and I'm concerned about my country, that home side, which side will be there, like India will be.
Yeah, actually. So what do you guys think about it? Do let us know in the comment section below. So do like, share,
Subscribe.
bye.